today's video, I thought I would talk you through my setting up process. How anal I am at getting everything absolutely spot on before I press that trigger button on my camera. I'll cover the settings with you as well, but little things like how anal I am at setting my tripod up, how I look for my compositions. It might be of interest to you or it might not. Maybe you'll pick something up. I'm going to do it with two scenarios. One is from where I am at the moment, looking out at the pier, which is going to be a very simple minimalistic shot. High tide, by the way, right now, and the sun is about to rise. Although we're not going to get any sunrise whatsoever because the sky is full of cloud and it's very misty in the horizon. So it's going to be a real minimalistic feel. I'll probably put my 10-stop filter on there, opt for a 2-minute exposure and make it really minimalistic. But two scenarios. One from here, which is going to be super simple, super simple. So if this is too simple for you, you might want to consider skipping on. And the next setup and scenario, it'll be a little bit more complicated in terms of a setup. I'm going to shoot from underneath the pier. So when I shoot in environments like that, I'll talk you through my thought process about the type of picture I'm looking to achieve and then how I go about achieving it. Hopefully, this is something of interest to some of you guys. It's a bit of a strange one actually, because it's only this morning that I actually think about creating this video in terms of why don't I actually show people how I set my camera up. Maybe not so much on the first image, but certainly on the second image it'll probably be of interest to you. But yeah, setting the camera up is something I just do. It takes me seconds. I run through pretty much the same procedure all the time, and I do it usually without thinking. But I thought, well, you know, maybe if I made this into a formula that people could understand, then maybe they would gain something from it. Like I say, not so much from this location, but certainly from the second location. Right, so first things first, I need to have in my own mindset an idea of what I want to photograph. And I didn't know until I came here today. I was expecting a really gorgeous sunrise, but of course that's just not going to happen. So very quickly thinking on my feet, I'm now going to opt for a really minimalistic shot. I'll probably end up with a 1 or 2 minute exposure. And so therefore in my own mindset now straight away I'm looking possibly for 1/3 of the floor, 2/3 of the sky, and it is going to be pretty much grey all the way through. Second scenario will be very different, trust me. So let's go through my procedure. First of all, I'm going to opt for a 2-minute exposure, so make sure my camera is well and truly rock solid in where it is, and of course it is at the moment. I've watched the waves coming in, and where I am at the moment, even with the highest tide like now, I'm the right side of it. So I'm not going to get 1.5 minutes into my exposure only to find out that the front leg then sinks in the sand. Nothing worse than that. Okay, so make sure my tripod is nice and level. And next, let's look for my composition. Let's make you guys a little bit darker. I think that should be fine. So let's bring up the properties here just so I can see what I'm doing. Alright, so in this instance, the first thing I want to do is get my composition right, hold my horizon on that rules of thirds, and the pier coming from the left is in the third all the way to the top right hand third, which is exactly what I'm looking for. I'm happy with that. And next I'm going to make sure that my horizon is level. Super important to make sure that my horizon is level. And next I'm going to focus 1/3 of the way into the frame. I'm going to opt for f11 by the time I set my camera up. So at f11, focusing 1/3 of the way into the frame, everything will be rendered in focus. And next I'm just going to bring up my histogram and get my settings right. Right, let's start off as always, really parrot fashion, ISO down to 100, aperture, I'm going to opt for f11, That of course would change if I wanted to do something fancy with my image. Your aperture controls your depth of field. If I wanted a shallow depth of field, then I would opt for a small number. I wouldn't really opt for a larger number unless I was doing something fancy with the water, which we might do in a second. And now looking at my histogram, it's all the way to the left. So I'm now going to need to slow my shutter speed down, 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 to push that histogram up until it goes right of center, but making sure that that doesn't clip and touch the edge. So I would probably go for something like that. That's an 1/8 of a second. And now that's in place, ordinarily I would opt for a 2-second timer, but because in this instance I want to make sure that my timing is right, here I'm going to add my intervalometer into the side of the camera. I'm not blown away by this picture, but it's a good scenario to talk you through, I'm guessing. So what I'm looking for now is I want this water to come up around about here, so that I've got the third up there and I want to make sure I've got the third down here, something like that. That's interesting, that's quite nice. And if I opted for a longer shutter speed, I would then just simply time the picture taking. So like now, as the tide is receding that way, I get these lovely streaky lines in the bottom of my image. I wouldn't do any more than that. That's it. Nice and simple. If I wanted to play around with my shutter speed, so at the moment I'm at an 1/8 of a second, what I could do in this instance is reduce my ISO by 1 stop. I could close my aperture by 1 stop. So therefore, I now need to claw 2 stops of light back from my shutter speed. 2 stops is 6 clicks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So now from the same scenario at ISO 50, at f16, I now could shoot this with a 3.2 second exposure. Again, I'm not just going to rattle off the shot, I'm going to wait until the tide comes up to where I want it. That looks quite nice. Let's grab that shot. By the way, it looks like there's a problem with the lens, because that pier sticking out there is not flat and it's not level, but it's not flat and it's not level in real life. Yeah, take that one again, I like that. I'm going to change the composition ever so slightly so that I can take a really minimalistic shot of that pier and avoid what's going on down here. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to go. I haven't got my normal tripod head on here. You may have noticed, I don't know. I broke it. Broke it. Let's have a look. I want to make sure that comes in from the third. I can reduce or lower that horizon down a little bit more to avoid those waves. Of course, what I would prefer to do is actually move the camera closer to the water's edge, but I won't. I'll leave it like that. Let's just double check everything just to make sure my horizon's level. Tighten all that off. That looks perfectly fine. But now, because I'm not showing any of the floor, I now want to make sure that I focus to infinity. So let's zoom in at that. That's perfect. So now my composition is right. Let's look at my settings. Okay, so let's take my ISO back to 100. Let's set my aperture to f11, which is where I prefer. Looking at my histogram, clearly we've got too much light. Let's close that down, 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 down. Now, I want this to be a really minimalistic feel. So what I'm looking for here is I want to achieve an 1/8 of a second, only because I know that when I drop my 10-stop filter down on the front of that lens, an 1/8 of a second equates to 2 minutes using a 10-stop filter. I can add a bit more light by opening the aperture a bit more. There's nothing between here and the pier, so it's not going to make that much of a difference. So I will happily shoot that at f8. So currently I'm at f8 ISO 100 at an 1/8 of a second. I've refocused onto the pier itself and switched my focus onto manual, so that won't change when I take my picture. And there, so that's one in the bag. Not very exciting, but that's one picture in the bag. But hopefully it should look a bit more exciting when I add my 10-stop filter. Let's throw that on there. Now I know through experience, like I said earlier, an 1/8 of a second equates to a 2-minute exposure, so I'm simply going to switch my camera to bulb mode. Just confirm everything is as it was when it was in manual, ISO 100. My aperture was at f8, which is there. I now know that if I set my timer to 2 minutes, I'll have a perfectly exposed image. Now I like that, it's a really minimalistic feel. On to the second scenario. I want to photograph, it might be a little bit noisy here, I do apologise, but I've got waves crashing around my feet. I want to photograph a really minimalistic shot, but in a quite dramatic way from underneath the pier. So this time I'm going to shoot out. So that causes a couple of problems. One, obviously we've got waves around the tripod legs. So the first thing I'm going to do is make sure my tripod legs are on established stones, so not sand, not wet sand, but established stones. So as the waves come in and go out again, my tripod isn't going to sink. Trust me, you do not want to try and do this. If you're shooting, or if you're opting for a long exposure, that is of course, which I am, you do not want to be doing this on wet sand. And even this here I might struggle, but let's give it a go. Most important thing is the camera relative to the pier itself. In other words, if I stand here, I'm going to be really lazy. But the problem is, I want everything to be really square, everything to be really symmetrical. And if my camera is here, then the third pole, which is in the center, I can then see a line of poles going down. It makes the picture look a bit unbalanced to me, and I'm not keen on that. So the first thing I'm going to do is, in a really anal fashion, is move this camera across so I can't see any of the other center poles as it goes down. So the symmetry to me is a lot better in this instance. 1, 2, 3 stanchions, and that's great. I much prefer that. Let's fire up my camera, and once again let's bring you guys in to my camera so you can see how I'm going to set this up. Let me show you what I mean with regards to this center pole here. If I move the camera to here, you can now see when I'm looking at the 1, 2, 3 poles, so the one on the right, one on the left, and then the one in the center, then you can see the center one just doesn't sit right with me. That's the point I was trying to make. So I'm going to move my camera there. That's where I want the camera to be. So now let's have a look at this. Let's open that right up. That's better. 1, 2, 3. I will get my camera nice and level. And the next thing, compositionally wise, I want to make sure that everything sits pretty much on a rules of third. And I'm going to raise the camera up. At 24mm, I can't go any wider than that. I'm looking at the feet. I don't want the feet half in and half out. I want all the feet in, or of course I can miss the feet out and go to there. I'm gonna go for something like that. The water will cover the feet altogether, And I like that. So now I'm going to check my camera settings and make sure that my horizon is nice and level. So now let's look at my settings. Well, ISO 100. I want to opt for f11 like I normally do, and now I'm going to slow my shutter speed down. My focus is already in place, but what I'm looking to do now is create multiple exposures. I want it overexposed. You can see my histogram is really overexposed on the right hand side, but it's lifted some of the light from underneath the pier, and what I want is the ability to pull some of that information back in post-production. So let's take a picture there. Now let's decrease the light by 1 stop. So I'm going to increase my shutter speed, 1, 2, 3. That's 1 stop, and I'm going to retake that picture, and I'm going to do the same thing again, increase it 1, 2, 3. It's almost like I'm creating HDR. The image won't look like a HDR over-processed image by the time I finish with it, but I just want the ability to claw some of that detail back from underneath the pier. Right, so now let's take that final shot. I want to capture this at 1/8 of a second, and the reason being, like I said earlier, 1/8 of a second, I now know that's a 2-minute exposure when I drop my 10-stop filter on the front of that lens. Let's open that aperture up. I don't mind going to f8, and that looks good. f8, in actual fact, let's close it a little bit more. It won't make any difference when you combine them. f9, f11 is exactly the same. So now let's throw my 10-stop filter on there and grab that image over a 2-minute exposure.